could stay like this, forever following you. Just don't get too far, and I'll be right where you are.
Nandasui Sukampanayu Mishuna Tuiusqua, Wachi Shinnecock, Wachi, Winin Wachi Montauk. My given name is I lead canoe. I am Butterfly Woman. I am a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, Long Island, New York. I also descend from the sister tribe Montauk in Montauk, Long Island, New York. And I am the daughter of Esther Lee, the granddaughter of Ferdinand Lee, and the great granddaughter of Ferdinand Lee the second. I come from a very long line of whalers in the Shinnecock and the Montauk, Long Island areas. So hence why there's the word canoe in my traditional language, because I spend a lot of time on the water and my people still live on the water. The Shinnecock community is actually in Southampton, Long Island, New York. We are a people who have not been removed from our land. There's just been a encroachment around the land. So when the settlers came over, when the colonizers came over, they settled in Long Island as early as 1638. And our community was still there. And so they kind of lived around us. And as we move forward into 2019, there has been a number of development around our what is known now as reservation land. I actually didn't grow up on a reservation. My mother did. She grew up, her parents, so forth and so forth and so forth, for the most part grew up there. I did not, but because my mom is a traditional woman, and not all people that grow up on a reservation, just because you live on a reservation doesn't always mean that your household is teaching you the culture, So my mother, growing up in her culture, and embracing her culture, because sometimes you can also teach people the culture, but they don't embrace it. You see that example between siblings sometimes. Can be raised in the same household, could be submerged in the culture, and one sibling just doesn't really, partake in the culture that much. So my mother raised me in the culture, and also raised my brother. So from the womb, and coming out of it, I used to sit in the dirt while my mother would be on her hands and knees and weed the garden, and let me play with carrots that she pulled up, or things of that nature, or squash, or corn. I grew up in that way. I grew up swimming on my mother's back in our bay, and my mother knew where all the sandbars were. She grew up as an Indian woman, knowing the lay of the land underneath the water. So these are things that as I'm older I embrace, because my mind thinks about it differently. When I was younger, I was just looking forward to not letting go of her neck while we're swimming out there, and then we would get to a place and she would just be standing up. So as early as I can ever remember, I've always embraced it, because I look up to my mom, so I always embrace that. And of course, it takes a village. So people that were very, very close to my mother, her peers and her elders, were embraced their culture as well. So, I kind of grew up all around that. And the thing too, when you grow up in a circle that is a traditional circle, when you do something that is taboo or against traditions, or kind of not following the proper protocol, those in that circle will lightly tap you back into that protocol. And so that's kind of how I learned as I got older the do's and don'ts, but from a very, very, very young age. My mom always says that my first footsteps were dancing, at our powwow, which is very contemporary, but it's still very important to our traditional culture. partaking in those ceremonies. And so my mom always said that those were my very first footsteps. So as early as I can remember, I've always embraced it, you know.
So, for you as a Shinnecock woman and all the history that you carry and you teach about, what does it mean for you personally, to be a Shinnecock woman, and what responsibilities come with that?
That's a deep question, because now when I hear that, I think about I think about all of the other Shinnecock women. When I hear that question, I think about what is my responsibility to the other women, because we are the backbones of this nation. I think it means being very strong, and not always strong as in the iron fist strong, but very strong in spirit, very resilient. And I think about, for me, it just means being consistent and having a lot of patience, and preserving everything that I've ever learned from any Shinnecock woman, and just making sure that I pass that down to any other young person that will one day become a Shinnecock woman. I think that is what the ultimate responsibility is, and then our community will be a lot stronger in many ways.
All right, so for those who might be watching that don't understand the traditional position of the woman in a tribal nation, could you talk about that a little bit?
So a traditional position for a woman, all of our communities have very different, views on what the role of a woman is, because we all come from so many different cultural communities in Indian country or in indigenous communities, particularly in the Northeast, and our surrounding sister tribes and tribes that are kind of confederated within our tribes. We're matriarchal. So a woman's role is to sustain, nurture, and give life. And in order to do that, you have a very large say as to what happens in life. What's not happening right now is the respect towards the women that have a say as to what's happening in life. And that's what we're lacking today. But in a traditional community, that respect has to be given to the woman so that she can have the empowerment within herself to be able to sustain the life of her children and sustain the life of her mate, and nurture at the same time, and be able to give life, whether it is from the soil, when Mother Earth gives birth to corn, beans, and squash. It's her job to nurture Mother Earth through that pregnancy. But what happens is when you tear down a woman so much, she doesn't even have the strength for herself, let alone help to sustain somebody else's life and help to nurture somebody else. And that's where I see that a lot of women have been so broken down that we have to be able to reach them in there. And I think that's where our community needs to kind of get back to traditionally. So I try to do everything in my power to think about other women, and I always think about my mother, my grandmothers, my great-grandmothers, and all the women before me. And I always think about the difficulties that they had to face from the outside world, and what did the community during the time help these women do so that I could be here. And one of the biggest and most beautiful things right now in our time is this development, or not development, but this resurgence of a sisterhood that's occurring, because we've lost our clan mother systems in a lot of these communities, where you have women who had the eldest women of the families essentially would be appointed to be the clan mother. And there would be a council of clan mothers. And in that council, you'd have a lot of traditional things that would go on. Perhaps there's a young girl that's coming into womanhood. How are we going to, we as in this council, going to initiate her into this? What are we each going to give her to help her? Because one day in 83 years, she might be sitting on this council, and that starts from the time that she becomes a woman. And we're beginning to kind of get back to these sisterhood circles because of the destruction that has been happening to the women, the tearing down. It's like we're kind of going back to one another for that empowerment. But if a nation can recognize that that's what's going on, then they can begin to respect that.
I've noticed that a lot of the social leaders or people who are having the most impact at this point in time are the women. So how do you think that empowerment has affected the leadership that the women are displaying now in terms of, the activism and the changes that we see going on in Indian country?
Well, I think it's extremely important. Again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, when the community recognizes that the women are empowering themselves, then it's kind of forcing them to humble themselves to respect what's going on and position themselves where they're naturally supposed to be. Now, we call people leaders because they are in official leadership positions. But, when you talk about governing ourselves underneath the natural law and following, the path that the Creator has set us individually to be, Creator doesn't set all of us on the same path. My purpose, your purpose is not the same. Maybe the missions of our purposes are in alignment with together, and now we can work together. But I can't necessarily fulfill your shoes and you can't fulfill my shoes. Doesn't mean that you're a leader and I'm not a leader. But when you have these official leaders looking at these women that are community leaders and are leading not only just within their families, but on a global level, but don't necessarily have an official position, you have people that cannot humble themselves and pull these influential, empowering women to an official position. But if they do try to raise them to some level of degree of leadership, they try to degrade them in front of everybody, and that really breaks a nation. And right now it's like you are beginning to have a lot more women within our own tribal communities stand up to our leadership. And that's that.
This is a kind of standard question, but where do you see yourself in 10 years?
My dad used to ask me those questions all the time when I was 10. I was like, God, I didn't really know I was like, I don't know what I'll be doing at 20. I'll be still in high school. I don't know. In 10 years, I see myself happily married with beautiful kids. I see myself as to be very enterprising. I see myself being able to be influential to young people and to peers my age. I see myself being able to be in a better position than I am now to help my people on all levels of accords. I see myself being educated. I see myself educated as far as having a degree higher than what I have, and I know that a lot of people frown upon that sometimes, especially traditionalists sometimes, because it's an institution. It's a colonized institution where we get these our paper from, and I was raised thinking both ways, and as I'm realizing that is my way to protest that institution, to come through it, and be it Ivy League or not, to come through it and publish books that will kind of write out the lies, because now it's being published through me, who will be able to hold a PhD or law degree over the colonizers' published books prior to. You know, I see myself being able to do that. I'm very humble, so I don't always see myself how everybody else sees me. I just see myself as just like a family person, someone that really cares a lot about the children. You know, I want to be able to put myself in a position where, or get myself to a position where, you know, I have a lot of young nieces and nephews and cousins that have these amazing dreams and they want to do things, but I'm not financially in a place to be able to help them. And unfortunately, it takes that to be able to get us out of where we need to get, because they've taken our resources from us, you know. So we have to be able to be financially and economically sustainable, in which right now, as tribal people, we're not, and we're hurting. And I don't want to continue to hurt. So in the next 10 years, I want to be able to educate myself on not how to continue to hurt, not only just myself, but to teach people how to do the same. You know, that's where I want to be able to get to in the next 10 years.
So in terms of this weekend's event, I want to give it like a brief synopsis on what this weekend's event was about, what inspired it, what role you played in it.
Yeah, I mean, this weekend's event was very empowering. You know, it's going to take me probably 4 days to really, you know, take in the medicine, and then probably years after that. Because what we did January 18th here in Washington, D.C., at the BIA.
We stood on those steps this morning over there, and a nice sign up top said the Department of Interior. But do you know that that was originally the Department of War? The Department of War against our indigenous people of this land. I'm from what's called the First Contact Tribe. Our first contact was in 1638. In 1640, they put us in stockades in our town, put us on display if we spoke our language, if we taught, if we practiced our ceremonies. This is in 1640. And from that time on, they've tried to colonize, homogenize, and pasteurize us, and we said no.
We marched to the BIA. We prayed at the BIA. You know, in the 1970s, many of the same people that were there, some of those same elders, and some of people that were which my age, who have uncles, aunts, and grandparents or parents, that came to protest and take over the BIA. And the mere fact that we are still their seeds, and in which they've planted, and we're still fighting for many of the same injustices. It's a lot to take in. There's kind of no words for it. It's a very the energy around it is so strong and so heavy. And so when we're all there and knowing that, and looking at these cement buildings, in which you know, our ancestors were shot at or, you know, beaten down, and to know that some of us kind of weren't sure what was going to take place in the very beginning part of the day. You could feel that energy, like, you know, there's guards right outside of the BIA, and, you know, they're very well aware of Indian country, and they're very well aware of what happens when natives come and protest the BIA, and you can kind of feel that standoff tension before we started the prayer. And, you know, but it's also, that's why, you know, I believe that when you bring people together like that, how you start off that day is very important. And we started off that day in prayer, and we started off that day in unity and in song, in one mind, in one voice, and the rest of the day was very smooth, you know. And I felt that. I mean, as the day went on, the sun came out. There wasn't anything that was out of place. you know. There were children, there were elders. We had people in wheelchairs that were in the march. You know, you had people come from Japan, you had people come from Australia, you know, and it wasn't about just one tribe, you know, and you also were able to see the diversity and the people that were there, and also embrace one another, which is beautiful too, because that's a long time coming for Indian country in itself. You know, a very long time, and that's why, you know, it's called the Indigenous Peoples Movement. I mean, that's just an event that took place. This isn't over. You know, that was the prayer, and then the march to the Lincoln Memorial was very powerful. I mean, you had women that are organizing around the missing, murdered Indigenous women, and they're out of the chapter out of Seattle, and they came. There was almost like 30 or 40 of them, you know, coming from Washington State, and you know, it was just really beautiful to see that, and how everything just organically happened. You know, you had a lot of people that were volunteers that just wanted to help. There were even people that had hot chocolate set up, you know, staging. You had a lot of elders, you know, that have been fighting this fight for close to 80 years, you know, that were there. And just to see them converse with each other, and who knows when the last time they saw each other, you know, just to see like a place like an event like that to bring people in the movement together, because we don't get to see each other often. I mean, we now have sacred Facebook where we can communicate with each other and talk to each other, and, you know, but the physical hug and embrace when you see your friend that is being beat down by the police in Washington State, or in North Dakota, or in Hawaii, you know, or in New Jersey, you know, and all you're doing is communicating electronically. It means so much to our spirits to be able to connect in one place. So that's what that march really, really, really was about, because it's healing in so many different ways, and it allows us to strengthen ourselves, go back on the front lines, strap our boots up, whether that's in a physical sense, or whether that's in a courtroom, whether it's in our jobs, whether it is in our households, whether it is in our tribal council meetings, all those different kinds of things. That's what that march, it really gave people that good medicine. And I had conversations with people that, from all different kinds of people, they were like, you know, I'm really glad I came, you know, because I wasn't really sure, and I thought it was going to be cold, and, you know, I just didn't really know, you know, how I feel about this, and I didn't hear anything bad about it, you know, and that just felt good for my spirit, because I needed it too. You know, I think so much about everybody else, and I don't always think about myself, and I realized it's like, man, this is what I was needing. This is why I was feeling the way I was for the past couple of months, because as Indian people, we're communal people. We're supposed to be around each other, and the longer we are without each other, the weaker we feel, the sadder we feel. I don't know why I feel like this, and I just feel because we're not supposed to be that way, you know. And when we have things like this to happen, it rejuvenates us. You know, we're all just happy, and we're in a good way, and that's how life is supposed to be. You know, and even though we're coming around each other to unify because of the hurt that we are feeling from genocide and all these environmental injustices, it's painful, but it's far more painful to deal with it by yourself than it is when you unify, you know. And the amount of media that came out, because when I got back to the hotel room, of course, we turned on the news, and there was not a single clip about the march. Not anything. Not a single clip about it. But you had all the other marches and all the other events that were taking it on in DC, and not a single mentioned clip or anything. And that is why, like, when media comes out, I commend them, because if it's not for independent film or independent photographers, or we would not be able to get mass media's attention. We really wouldn't be able to reach the people that would be able to reach. And that's the beautiful thing about what I call, well, what I was told was sacred Facebook. You know, it is sacred in many of those ways. So
Yeah, you spoke a little bit on the diversity of the Indian nations. Phenotypically, many of us look different. As someone who's actually active and spends time all over the place, is that really an issue, or is that just an issue amongst people that are just belly aching and just, you know, complaining?
oh no, it's really an issue. I mean, I grew up the color I am. You know, August Wilson said it best. I'm not gonna say he said it best, but he did say it. He was in an interview one time and he said, you know, black people are distinctively different. If I'm walking from miles and miles away and you see my little figure, you can be able to tell that I'm black, but my skin is brown, at least, you know, or red, whatever we want to say it is. Now, as I get closer, my phenotype will come out, and if you are somewhat educated or whatnot, you'll be able to kind of think of, oh, what do you look like, or where do you come from, or oh, you might be Guyanese, or you might be Persian. I've gotten before. Get this all the time, you know. But I know that nowadays, because there's so much intermarriage, a lot of people aren't saying anything, because if they say something, they too put themselves on the other side of who they're trying to talk about. Mm-hmm. And because for a long time, all right, example, right now, one of the biggest issues in Indian country, one of the biggest controversial topics in Indian country is constitutional reform. You have a lot of tribal governments that are moving towards constitutional reform for a lot of different reasons. But one of the reasons is this 1/4 blood quantum versus lineal descendancy for who and who cannot be a citizen of that tribal community. So that opens a huge amount of discussion, because now, as a lineal descendant of, you know, Ferdinand Lee the First, who is the Whaler, Wyandance, Quashawam, Sassacus, Tatamam, Tatashtashook, you know, all these different, I'm a lineal descendant of these people. Whether my skin is brown or not, black, whatever, I'm a lineal descendant of that. And because my tribe has that as who is and who is not, I'm enrolled in the Shinnecock Indian Nation. And a lot of our tribal members are the same way in that regard. Now, you have a lot of other communities that are changing this blood quantum acceptance, because when you continuously marry, that blood quantum degree changes. And then who are you left with legally in your tribe? Now, if you were to go by lineal descent, that's not going to change. It's just actually going to continuously grow. Now, I'm not really sure how you're going to show this video or not, but I'm just going to say it like it is. Our ancestors, now I will say specifically in my family lineage and the genealogy that I've seen for my family, specifically during the 17 and the 1800s, there were a lot of intermarrying within our own families and in our own tribal communities, specifically surrounding tribes. I have a feeling that that was done on purpose, because I know that if my family if my ancestors kept marrying out, then our culture would be lost. Our genetic makeup would be lost. My mom talks about it, and her parents' generation talks about it, that at one point in time, you could see who was from this family. You could tell who was from this family and who was from that family. But because there's been so much intermarrying, that's not the case. And so a big topic, I mean, for a long time growing up, being a brown native or being browner than other natives, they made you feel horrible. They had a colonized mind way of thinking. Now, we have ancestors specifically on the coastline that greeted the settlers that color wasn't an issue. Some of these little white children from some of these villages that were established in the 1600s would run away. There is an account that there was a child that ran from Plymouth, Massachusetts, when they set up that village, all the way to somehow he ended up with the Nantucket natives. And he was gone missing. And the Nantucket natives were going to bring him back to the village, and that kid did not want to go back. For whatever reason, because he just felt that he could be himself. The English were treating their children a lot differently than we were treating our children. And our ancestors didn't treat that child any different. He was a child. They said he was probably 8 or 9. But that says that our people were not racist. So this racist, this prejudice mindset that has been put into our communities, and we're even talking about it on a political level now, constitutional reform, because blood quantum versus lineal descendancy, that has nothing to do with that. It has a lot to do with the way people look. And what tribes don't like is they don't like others saying, oh, you don't look Indian, or your tribe, they're this, or your tribe, they're this. That's an identity issue. That's actually a personal issue. That's a personal issue. And people have taken their personal issues and they've made it other people's issues, and they've embedded that ideology into their community, and now the community has this thought process. Because now you have kids that don't even know what the word blood quantum means or lineal descendant means, but they know what the color of somebody's skin is, and so they're going to treat people a certain way. And that's a problem. And you could smell it when you see it. But what I choose to do is I just choose to walk, because I know who I am. I just named not my whole, but a lot of people within my family tree. And no one can ever take that away from me, no matter what skin complexion I am. No one can ever take that away from me. And I walk like that. And that is something and I don't just do it because I'm arrogant. I do it because I want those other brown kids to see that it is okay and it is safe to walk that way. And the more and more people embrace that about themselves and come out of the shackles that people are trying to put on them, then I feel like the stronger we're going to be as a people again.
I could stay like this, forever following you. Just don't get too far, and I'll be right.